As Sarah Chun watched Judge Harrison condemn another innocent patient to death with a single stroke of his pen, the secret evidence in her pocket felt like it was burning through her scrubs. Soon it would burn through his entire empire of medical murder. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Sarah Chun's face as she studied the organ donation paperwork on her desk. Something wasn't right. After 15 years as head nurse in St. Mary's Memorial ICU, she had developed an instinct for regularities, and these documents set off every alarm in her mind. The patient in question, Michael Cooper, had been admitted 3 days ago with moderate injuries from a car accident. Nothing life-threatening, a broken leg, some bruised ribs, and a mild concussion. Yet here was his death certificate, signed and ready, waiting to be processed at tomorrow morning's shift change. Sarah's fingers traced the signature at the bottom of the form. Dr. Marcus Sullivan, Chief of Surgery. His normally precise handwriting seemed rushed, almost frantic. She'd worked with Marcus for over a decade, watching him rise from an ambitious resident to the hospital's most prominent surgeon. But lately, something had changed in him. Dark circles under his eyes, hushed conversations that stopped when others approached, and now this. Still here, Sarah? The night shift supervisor, Linda, poked her head into the office. You should have been home hours ago. Sarah carefully slid the papers into her bag. Just finishing up some documentation. You know how it goes? Linda nodded sympathetically. Don't work too hard. Judge Harrison's been asking about you again. The mention of Judge William Harrison sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The prominent judicial figure had taken an unusual interest in hospital affairs lately, particularly in cases involving organ donation. His frequent visits to Dr. Sullivan's office had become a source of gossip among the staff. Tell him I'm always happy to assist with any medical documentation he needs, Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral. She gathered her things, mind already racing through possibilities. The pieces were there, but the picture they formed was too horrifying to contemplate without proof. Outside, the autumn air bit through her jacket as she crossed the parking lot. The hospital loomed behind her, its windows like watchful eyes. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rachel Torres, her contact at the FBI. Need to meet. Usual place. Now, 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in a corner booth at the all-night diner 3 blocks from the hospital. The place was nearly empty, save for a few truckers and the usual late-night regulars. Rachel slid into the seat across from her, business casual attire at odds with the greasy spoon atmosphere. What did you find? Rachel kept her voice low, stirring her coffee without drinking it. Sarah pulled out copies of the paperwork. They're planning to declare him dead tomorrow morning. Michael Cooper, 34, perfect health except for accident injuries. All his organs are viable for donation. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she scanned the documents. And you're sure he's not critical? I checked on him an hour ago. He was watching TV and complaining about the hospital food. Sarah leaned forward. This isn't the first case. I've been tracking discrepancies in our organ donation records for months. But this is the first time I've caught it before. She couldn't finish the sentence. Rachel completed it for her. Before they kill him. The weight of those words hung between them. Sarah thought of all the unexpected complications over the past year. The patients who should have recovered but didn't. How many had there been before she started noticing the pattern? We need more than paperwork, Rachel said. We need to catch them in the act. But we also need to keep Cooper alive. Sarah's mind raced through scenarios. They'll move him to pre-op early tomorrow. Sullivan always schedules these special cases as the first surgery of the day. Then we need to move tonight. Rachel pulled out her phone. I can have a team ready in 4 hours. But Sarah, she fixed the nurse with a serious stare. Once we start this, there's no going back. These people, the judge, Sullivan, whoever else is involved, they're powerful. They'll come after you with everything they have. Sarah thought of her comfortable life, her respected position at the hospital, the safety of routine. Then she thought of Michael Cooper watching TV in his hospital bed, unaware that he'd been marked for death. "I took an oath," she said firmly. "First, do no harm. That means stopping others from doing harm too." Rachel nodded. "We'll need to make it look like Cooper died from natural causes. Keep him safe while we gather evidence. Are you ready to be the prime suspect in a patient's death?" The question should have terrified her. Instead, Sarah felt an odd sense of calm. "What do you need me to do?" As they planned through the night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of a precipice. Tomorrow, she would either save lives and expose a murderous conspiracy, or lose everything she'd worked for. There would be no middle ground. Outside the diner's window, she watched the hospital's lights glowing in the distance. Somewhere in that building, corrupt men were planning to end a life for profit. They thought their positions of power made them untouchable. They were about to learn otherwise. The sun would rise in a few hours, bringing with it either justice or destruction. Sarah Chun straightened her shoulders, ready to face whatever came. Sometimes she realized the most important choices in life were the ones that didn't feel like choices at all. The first rays of dawn painted St. Mary's Memorial in shades of gold as Sarah made her way through the staff entrance. Her overnight bag felt heavy with the weight of concealed recording equipment Rachel had provided. Each step through the familiar corridors now felt different, charged with purpose and danger. "Morning, Sarah!" Dr. Sullivan's voice made her start. He stood at the nurse's station, immaculate in his pressed white coat, reviewing charts with his usual air of authority. Looking at him now, it was hard to reconcile his polished exterior with what she suspected. "Dr. Sullivan," she managed a professional smile. "I see you're starting early today. Big day ahead." His eyes lingered on her a moment too long. "Special case in OR3. I'll need your assistance with the pre-op preparations for MR. Cooper." Sarah felt her heart rate quicken, but kept her expression neutral. "Of course. I'll head there now." Single quotes. As she walked away, she could feel Sullivan's gaze following her. Had he noticed anything different about her behavior? The weight of the wire beneath her scrub suddenly felt obvious, threatening to expose her. In Cooper's room, the morning sun streamed through half-drawn blinds. The patient was asleep, his chest rising and falling with healthy regularity. Sarah checked his vitals, each normal, reading a stark contrast to the death certificate waiting to be filed. "Nurse Chun?" Cooper stirred, blinking sleepily. "Is it time for more tests?" Sarah's throat tightened. This man had no idea he was marked for death. "Just routine checks," she said, adjusting his fore. With practiced movements, she slipped the FBI's monitoring device behind his bedframe. "How's the pain today?" "Better, actually. When do you think I can go home?" Before she could answer, a new voice cut through the room. "Good morning, Mr. Cooper." Judge William Harrison stood in the doorway, his imposing figure filling the frame. "I hope you don't mind a visitor?" Sarah's fingers froze on the IV line. Harrison wasn't supposed to be here, not now. The judge moved into the room with the confidence of someone who owned the space, his expensive suit out of place among the medical equipment. "I like to check on special cases personally," Harrison continued, his smile not reaching his eyes. "As head of the hospital board's ethics committee, patient welfare is my primary concern." Sarah fought to keep her face composed. Ethics committee. The irony would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. Harrison's recent appointment to that position suddenly made terrible sense. "That's very kind of you, Your Honor," Cooper said, clearly impressed by the judicial visit. "Everyone here has been so attentive." Harrison's gaze shifted to Sarah. "Nurse Chun has a particular talent for handling delicate cases. Don't you, Sarah?" The way he said her name made her skin crawl. "Just doing my job, Your Honor." "Indeed." Harrison moved closer, lowering his voice. Dr. Sullivan mentioned some concerns about Ma Cooper's latest tests. Perhaps we should discuss them outside. Sarah's mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. Rachel's team needed more time to get in position. Of course, she said, following Harrison into the hallway. Once outside, Harrison's friendly demeanor vanished. You've been asking questions, Nurse Chun, reviewing files that aren't part of your current cases. I'm thorough in my work, Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. Patient care requires attention to detail. Harrison stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. Let me be clear. Your dedication is admirable, but there are larger concerns at play. Concerns that someone in your position couldn't possibly understand. Are you threatening me, Your Honor? Threatening? He chuckled, the sound devoid of warmth. I'm offering you guidance. Your career here has been exemplary. It would be a shame to see it end over misunderstandings. Sarah thought of the recordings being captured right now, of Rachel's team preparing to move. She just needed to buy more time. I understand perfectly, she said, meeting his gaze. My only concern is proper patient care. Good. Harrison straightened his tie. Then you'll have no problem assisting Dr. Sullivan with this morning's procedure. M.R. Cooper's condition has unfortunately taken a turn for the worse. These things happen, sadly. As if on cue, Doctor. Sullivan approached with a team of unfamiliar surgical staff. Sarah recognized none of them, brought in specially for this case, no doubt. The pieces of their operation were falling into place with terrifying efficiency. Everything ready? Sullivan asked, his earlier warmth replaced by clinical detachment. Harrison nodded. Nurse Chun understands her role perfectly. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Sarah? Remember, some things are bigger than one life. The greater good requires difficult choices. Sarah watched them walk away, their words ringing in her ears. Greater good. Difficult choices. The kind of justifications people used when they'd forgotten the difference between right and wrong. She pulled out her phone, pretending to check messages while actually sending a coded alert to Rachel. Whatever happened next, she couldn't let them reach Cooper, not when she now knew for certain that both the judge and the chief of surgery were actively involved in the conspiracy. Time was running out, and Sarah Chun stood alone between killers and her victim. But she wasn't really alone anymore. Somewhere in the hospital, Rachel's team was moving into position. The trap was set. Now she just had to spring it before they could murder another innocent patient. What is the meaning of this? Sullivan demanded, scalpel still in hand. The meaning, Doctor, Rachel announced, is that we have you on camera preparing to murder a healthy patient for his organs. Judge Harrison, how interesting to find you here as well. On the operating table, right on cue, Michael Cooper began to stir. The OR erupted into chaos. Sullivan dropped his scalpel, its clatter against the floor lost in the commotion. Harrison's face contorted from shock to rage as FBI agents surrounded him, while the mysterious surgical team scattered like startled birds, only to be caught every exit. This is absurd. Harrison's judicial authority crumbled in the face of federal badges. I'm here on official hospital business. You have no jurisdiction. We have jurisdiction over murder, organ trafficking, and judicial corruption. Rachel cut him off, nodding to her agents to secure the suspects. Not to mention several interesting offshore accounts we've been monitoring. Sarah rushed down from the gallery to Cooper's side. He was fully awake now, confusion evident on his face as he took in the scene around him. What's happening? Why am I in an operating room? You're safe now, Mr. Cooper, Sarah assured him, checking his vitals. These men were planning to harvest your organs without consent. We had to stage your death to catch them in the act. Cooper's eyes widened with horror as understanding dawned. They were going to kill me? But Doctor, Sullivan said it was just a routine follow-up. Nothing routine about this operation, Rachel said, joining them. We've been building this case for months. Sarah's discovery of your paperwork was the break we needed. Sullivan, now in handcuffs, fixed Sarah with a venomous glare. You betrayed everything we built here. Do you know how many lives our program saved? The greater good. Don't you dare talk about the greater good, Sarah snapped. Years of suppressed anger finally breaking through. I've watched you murder patients for their organs. You turned this hospital into a slaughterhouse. Harrison laughed bitterly from his restraints. You fool. You think this ends with us? The demand for organs will always exceed supply. Someone will fill that gap. We just did it efficiently. Efficiently? Cooper struggled to sit up, facing his would-be murderers. I have a family, children. You were going to kill me for parts, like I was some junked car. Rachel signaled her team to remove the suspects. Save it for your arraignment, gentlemen. I'm sure the press will love hearing how a respected judge and surgeon set up an organ trafficking ring. As they were led away, Sarah felt the adrenaline drain from her body. The past 24 hours caught up with her all at once, leaving her trembling. Rachel steadied her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. You did good, Sarah. Really good. But this isn't over yet. What do you mean? Harrison's right about one thing. Operations like this don't exist in isolation. We need to identify their contacts, their buyer network, other hospitals that might be involved. Rachel lowered her voice. And we need to keep you safe. They'll have friends in high places who won't be happy about this. Sarah thought about her comfortable life at St. Mary's, now forever changed. Her colleagues would soon know her as the whistleblower who brought down their chief of surgery. Some would understand, others would see her as a traitor. What happens now? Cooper asked, still trying to process his near-death experience. Now, Rachel said, we move you both to protective custody. Sarah, go home and pack what you need. An agent will escort you. Mr. Cooper, we'll need your full statement. But first, let's get you somewhere safe. As the FBI's medical team transferred Cooper to a secure facility, Sarah walked through the hospital's corridors one last time. News of the arrests was already spreading. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers. Former friends and colleagues turned away as she passed. Linda, the night supervisor, caught up to her near the exit. Sarah, wait. Is it true? Did you really set them up? Sarah met her old friend's eyes. They were killing people, Linda. What would you have done? Linda's face softened with understanding. Be careful, okay? Harrison has friends on the hospital board. They won't let this go easily. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen, transforming the hospital's windows into sheets of blinding light. An FBI agent waited by a black SUV, ready to escort her home. Sarah took one last look at St. Mary's Memorial, the place that had been her professional home for 15 years. She thought of all the patients who had died mysteriously over the years, their deaths now cast in a sinister new light. How many lives could she have saved if she'd noticed sooner? The weight of that question would stay with her. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rachel. Turn on the news. Stories breaking. Sarah watched her world implode on national television from the safety of an FBI safe house. The story dominated every news channel. Prestigious hospital's deadly organ. Trafficking ring exposed. Security footage of Harrison and Sullivan being led out of St. Mary's in handcuffs played on endless loop, interspersed with archival photos of their distinguished careers. Sources say up to 30 patients may have been targeted over the past 2 years. A reporter announced outside the hospital gates, federal investigators are reviewing all suspicious deaths and organ donations during Judge Harrison's tenure on the hospital board. Rachel muted the TV. How are you holding up? Sarah sat in the safe house's sparse living room, a half-empty cup of cold coffee in her hands. I keep thinking about the signs I missed. Janet Rodriguez last spring, perfectly healthy after a minor surgery, then sudden organ failure. Mark Whitman in December, routine appendectomy, unexpected complications. Don't do that to yourself. Rachel warned. These people were professionals at covering their tracks. The fact that you caught on at all is remarkable. Sarah's phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from colleagues, journalists, even old friends from nursing school. She'd turned it off after the third death threat. Any word on Cooper? She asked. Safe at our medical facility. His family's with him now. Rachel's expression softened. You should see his kids. They know you saved their father's life. A knock at the door made them both tense. Rachel checked the security monitor before relaxing. It's Agent Torres with the latest files. The new agent entered with a thick stack of folders. You need to see these, Sarah. We've been going through Harrison's personal records. The network is bigger than we thought. Sarah leafed through the documents, her horror growing with each page. Bank transfers, falsified death certificates, correspondence with organ procurement specialists across the country. St. Mary's wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a nationwide operation. Look at these names. She pointed to a list of contacts. 3 more judges, 2 hospital administrators, even a state medical board member. They created a perfect system, a system that's now crumbling, Rachel said grimly. Harrison's arrest has them running scared. We've already picked up 2 more surgeons in Boston trying to flee the country. Sarah stopped at a familiar name in the files. Dr. Patricia Morrison? But she was my mentor in nursing school. We're finding corruption at every level, Agent Torres explained. People who started with good intentions convinced themselves they were serving a greater purpose. The weight of betrayal pressed down on Sarah. How many others like Dr. Morrison had been seduced by Harrison's arguments about the greater good? How many had convinced themselves that murder was justified if it saved other lives? A breaking news alert drew their attention back to the TV. Harrison's wife was giving a press conference outside their mansion. My husband is a humanitarian, she declared, perfectly composed despite the circumstances. He worked tirelessly to save lives through organ donation. These accusations are a witch hunt by desperate people seeking attention. Rachel unmuted the volume as reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Harrison, what about the evidence of falsified death certificates? Did you know about the offshore accounts? How do you respond to allegations that patients were murdered for their organs? Sarah watched the woman's polished facade crack slightly. No comment. My husband's lawyers will address these ridiculous claims. They're circling the wagons, Rachel observed. Harrison's friends in high places are already working to discredit the investigation. Will it work? Sarah asked. Not this time. We have too much evidence, too many witnesses. Cooper's testimony alone. Another knock interrupted them. This time, Rachel's hand moved to her weapon as she checked the monitor. Her expression turned grave. Sarah, it's Linda from the hospital. She says it's urgent. Sarah's former supervisor looked terrified when they let her in. They're destroying records, she blurted out. I came as soon as I could. The hospital administration is having an emergency server maintenance tonight. They're going to wipe everything. Rachel was already on her phone, mobilizing a team. We need a warrant now. Get cybercrimes involved. That's not all, Linda continued, her voice shaking. I overheard board members talking. They're planning to claim Sarah was involved, that she helped Sullivan in exchange for promotions, then turned on him when she was passed over for advancement. The accusation felt like a physical blow. They can't believe anyone would buy that. They don't need people to believe it, Rachel said darkly. They just need to muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt. Classic deflection strategy. Sarah thought of her years of service, her spotless record, her dedication to patient care. All of it could be twisted and used against her by people desperate to save themselves. What do we do? She asked. Rachel's expression was determined. We go on offense. Linda, are you willing to testify about what you heard? The night supervisor straightened her shoulders. That's why I'm here. I'm done being quiet. Good, because we're not just taking down Harrison and Sullivan anymore. Rachel's eyes gleamed with purpose. We're going to expose the entire system, every last corrupt doctor, administrator, and judge who thought they could play God with people's lives. Sarah felt a new resolve replace her fear. They had tried to paint her as a traitor, but the real betrayal had been committed by those who abandoned their oaths to do no harm. Whatever it takes, she said firmly. They don't get to bury this. Single quotes from the safe house window. Sarah watched a fleet of FBI vehicles depart for St. Mary's, their lights flashing silently in the gathering dusk. The race to preserve evidence was on, but her mind kept drifting to the faces of past patients, one she couldn't save because she hadn't known they needed saving from their own doctors. Coffee? Linda offered, holding out a fresh cup. She had refused to leave after delivering her warning, insisting on staying to help. You look like you're a million miles away. Just thinking about Andrea Kemp, Sarah said, accepting the coffee. Remember her? 27, marathon runner, came in with a sprained ankle last summer. Linda's face fell. The one who developed unexpected complications during her stay. Her organs went to 4 different recipients. Sullivan called it a miracle that we had perfect matches ready. Sarah's grip tightened on the cup. It wasn't a miracle. It was planned. Rachel entered the room, phone pressed to her ear. Teams are in position at the hospital. Cybercrimes is monitoring their network activity. She paused, listening. What? When? Her expression darkened. Get me everything on that judge. What's wrong? Sarah asked as Rachel ended the call. Harrison's being transferred to a minimum security facility. Judge Martinez signed the order an hour ago. Rachel threw her phone onto the couch in frustration. Martinez is on that list of contacts we found. Linda gasped. They're already protecting their own. Not for long, Rachel assured them. We're building cases against everyone involved. But we need to move fast. Sarah, those patient files you mentioned, how many similar cases can you remember? Sarah closed her eyes, memories flooding back. At least 12 in the past year. All relatively young. Healthy patients admitted for minor procedures. All suffered sudden, unexplained deterioration. I can think of 7 more, Linda added, plus the ones where family members raised questions but were pressured to drop it. Rachel started pacing, her investigator's mind clearly racing. We need to connect these deaths directly to organ recipients. Follow the organs, follow the money. Check Christina Watson's case, Sarah suggested. She died in February. Within hours, her heart was airlifted to Chicago. I remember because Sullivan was so insistent on expediting the paperwork. Linda pulled out her phone, scrolling through old texts. I still have the transport company's details. They were new. I'd never seen them before that night. Probably a front company, Rachel mused. We'll trace their incorporation records, see who's really behind them. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a news alert on the muted TV. The camera showed protesters gathering outside St. Mary's, holding signs demanding justice. Among them were families of past patients, their faces twisted with grief and rage as they realized their loved ones' deaths might not have been accidents. They're calling for an independent investigation, Rachel noted, turning up the volume. Public pressure could help counter Harrison's influence. The camera panned to a woman. Sarah recognized Andrea Kemp's mother. She was holding a photo of her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she spoke to reporters. I knew something was wrong. She was perfectly healthy one day. Then suddenly, they told us it was just one of those things that happens. That at least her death helped others live. The woman's voice broke. But they murdered her, didn't they? They murdered my baby girl. Sarah couldn't watch anymore. She turned away from the TV, but Linda caught her arm. Look, she pointed to the screen. A familiar figure had appeared behind Mrs. Kemp, Dr. Patricia Morrison. Sarah's former mentor approached the microphone, her face grave. As a senior physician at St. Mary's, I can no longer remain silent. What happened in our hospital was not just a failure of ethics. It was a systematic murder operation disguised as medical care. Rachel leaned forward intently. Is she doing what I think she's doing? I was approached by Judge Harrison 3 years ago, Morrison continued. He explained their special program for organ procurement. When I refused to participate, I was gradually pushed out of leadership positions. My concerns about suspicious deaths dismissed. The reporters erupted with questions, but Morrison held up her hand. I have documentation. Records of meetings, conversations, attempts to pressure me into cooperation. I'm here to turn everything over to federal investigators. She kept evidence, Sarah whispered. All this time, she was building a case. Rachel was already on her phone. Get a protection detail to St. Mary's now. Dr. Patricia Morrison needs immediate evacuation. But Morrison wasn't finished. Looking directly into the camera, she spoke words that would shake the medical establishment to its core. To my colleagues who participated in this program, your time of hiding behind medical terminology and legal manipulation is over. Come forward now, or be exposed as the murderers you are. The impact was immediate. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. OR Nurse Johnson here. I have information about Sullivan's special procedures. Who can I talk to? Then another. This is Dr. Chun from cardiology. I witnessed Harrison pressuring doctors to falsify records. I'll testify. It's starting, Rachel said, a note of triumph in her voice. The wall of silence is cracking. Linda wiped tears from her eyes. All those years, we thought we were alone in our suspicions. But others knew. They were just too afraid to speak up. Sarah thought of Morrison, her mentor, who had seemed to abandon her principles, who had actually been gathering evidence all along. How many others had been silently documenting the corruption, waiting for a moment when the truth could finally emerge? Rachel, she said suddenly, we need to get Morrison's evidence before anyone else does. And we need to protect everyone who's coming forward. Rachel nodded grimly. Already on it. But Sarah, she paused, choosing her words carefully. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Harrison and his friends won't go down without a fight. Let them fight, Sarah replied, watching more texts flood in from whistleblowers. The truth is stronger than their influence. The safe house phone rang. Another witness ready to talk. The next 48 hours unfolded like a medical thriller turned reality. Dr. Morrison's public statement had broken the dam, releasing a flood of testimonies that threatened to drown the entire corrupt system. Sarah, Linda, and Rachel worked tirelessly from the safe house, processing information from whistleblowers, while FBI teams raced to secure evidence before it could be destroyed. Another one, Rachel announced, hanging up her secure line. Dr. James from neurology says Harrison approached him last year about joining their special organ procurement program, offered to triple his salary. Sarah looked up from her laptop where she was documenting case patterns. Did he take the offer? No, but he recorded the conversation. Said he didn't trust Harrison's reputation. Rachel smiled grimly. These people were so confident in their power they got sloppy. Never imagined their colleagues would be gathering evidence against them. The TV continued its round-the-clock coverage. Harrison's wife had disappeared from public view after a devastating press conference where Dr. Morrison produced emails showing Mrs. Harrison's knowledge of the scheme. Sullivan's medical license had been suspended pending investigation, and 3 hospital board members had resigned. Then came the moment that changed everything. Breaking news, the anchor announced. Federal agents have discovered a hidden database containing detailed records of what investigators are calling harvest targets, patients deliberately selected for organ harvesting based on tissue matches with wealthy recipients. Warning: the following information may be disturbing. Sarah's blood ran cold as familiar names scrolled across the screen. Andrew Kemp, Mark Whitman, Janet Rodriguez, each name accompanied by clinical details, tissue typing data, and, most chillingly, price tags. They treated them like inventory, Linda whispered, horror in her voice. Each patient categorized by organ quality and market value. Rachel's phone erupted with calls. Martinez signed Harrison's transfer order, she said, checking messages. He's being moved tonight. We need to wait. She held up her hand, listening intently to her earpiece. Say that again? Sarah and Linda watched Rachel's expression shift from confusion to shock. Harrison's dead, she announced. Found in his cell an hour ago. Apparent suicide. Suicide? Sarah didn't believe it for a second. Or someone making sure he couldn't talk. My money's on the latter, Rachel agreed. Too many powerful people implicated in that database. Harrison knew everything about everyone. Before they could process this development, Sarah's secure phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Morrison. Urgent. Sullivan talking. Meeting at safe location in 20 minutes. Could expose entire network. Coming to you. Morrison's bringing Sullivan? Linda asked incredulously. How did she? The rest of her question was cut off by the sound of screeching tires outside. Rachel drew her weapon, moving to the window. Black SUV, no plates, she reported. Multiple occupants. This isn't right. Morrison was supposed to use official channels. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time from Morrison's official number. Where are you? Still at hospital with FBI team. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Rachel, the first text wasn't from Morrison. The windows exploded inward as flashbang grenades detonated through the safe house. The last thing Sarah saw before the world went white was Rachel shoving her and Linda toward the panic room. Temporary blindness, disorientation, ringing ears. Training kicked in. Sarah crawled toward where she remembered the panic room door, pulling Linda with her. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard Rachel returning fire, shouting into her radio for backup. They made it into the panic room just as the first armed figures breached the house. Rachel dove in behind them, slamming the reinforced door shut as bullets pinged off its surface. Police band's going crazy, Rachel said, checking her phone while keeping her weapon trained on the door. Similar attacks at 3 other safe houses. They're trying to eliminate witnesses before Sullivan can talk. Can they get in here? Linda asked, her voice shaking. Not quickly. Backup's 4 minutes out. Rachel's expression was grim, but now we know how far they'll go to keep their secrets. Sarah thought of Morrison, of Cooper, of all the whistleblowers who had come forward. We need to warn everyone. If they're hitting safe houses, already done, Rachel assured her. Emergency protocols activated. All witnesses being moved to secure military facilities. The sounds of gunfire outside intensified, then, abruptly, stopped. Federal agents, drop your weapons. Sarah recognized Agent Torres's voice, followed by more shouting, then silence. Rachel's radio crackled. Clear. Hostiles neutralized or in custody. Safe to exit. They emerged to find the safe house in shambles and multiple black-clad figures face down in handcuffs. Agent Torres approached, holding up a familiar ID. Private security contractors, she reported. Hired through a shell company linked to one of the hospital board members. But this is interesting. She handed Rachel a phone recovered from one of the attackers. Text ordering the hit came from Judge Martinez, his private number. Single quotes. Rachel's smile was predatory. Guess who just moved to the top of our target list? There's more, Torres added. Sullivan's asking for a deal. Says he'll name every judge, administrator, and surgeon involved in the organ trafficking network, including some very prominent names. Sarah looked at the destruction around them. Broken glass, bullet holes, the remnants of a life she used to know. But instead of fear, She felt a fierce determination. "They tried to bury the truth," she said. "Instead, they just gave us the final proof we needed of how far this conspiracy goes." Rachel nodded. "And now we take them all down. Every last one." The aftermath of the attack transformed the investigation from a medical scandal into a national security operation. Sarah found herself relocated to a military base, surrounded by other whistleblowers and witnesses who had narrowly escaped similar assassination attempts. Dr. Morrison was there, looking exhausted but resolute. 6 different hit teams, she reported, joining Sarah in the secure briefing room, all targeting key witnesses. They were willing to commit mass murder to keep their operation secret. But why now? Linda wondered. She hadn't left Sarah's side since the attack. Why such a desperate move? Rachel entered with a thick folder marked classified. Because of this, Sullivan's complete confession, including details about their international connections. The organ trafficking wasn't just about money. It was about power and influence. She spread photographs across the table. Prominent surgeons at charity galas, hospital administrators meeting with foreign diplomats, Judge Harrison at private parties with political figures. They created a system where the wealthy and powerful could essentially order designer organs on demand, Rachel explained. Need a heart? They'd find a match and orchestrate an accident. Liver failure? Suddenly, a healthy patient would develop complications during routine surgery. Sarah studied a photo of Sullivan at a private medical conference. The recipients had to know. You can't just receive a perfectly matched organ without questioning the timing. Some knew explicitly. Others chose not to ask questions, Morrison added. But Sullivan kept records of everything. Insurance against betrayal. When he realized Harrison was dead, he decided to talk before he met the same fate. A military officer entered, whispering something to Rachel. Her expression hardened. Judge Martinez was just found dead in his chambers, she announced, along with 2 other judges from Harrison's contact list. All apparent suicides. Their cleaning house, Linda realized, eliminating everyone who could expose the full scope. Sarah thought of all the patients who had died, their families who still didn't know the truth. How high does this go? Rachel hesitated before responding. Sullivan's testimony implicates cabinet members, foreign diplomats, CEOs of major healthcare companies. The entire medical system is compromised. Then we release everything, Sarah said firmly. All the evidence, all the names. Let the public see the truth. It's not that simple, Rachel cautioned. The implications could destabilize. She was interrupted by urgent shouting from the hallway. Agent Torres burst in, tablet in hand. Someone's broadcasting the database, she reported breathlessly. Every name, every transaction, every death. It's going viral. They crowded around the tablet, watching as the story exploded across social media. Hospital boards implicated in organ trafficking. Judges taking bribes to cover up murders. Wealthy recipients paying millions for harvested organs. Who released it? Rachel demanded. Multiple sources, Torres replied. It's like someone created a dead man's switch. If certain people died suddenly, Morrison smiled slightly. Harrison wasn't the only one keeping insurance. Some of us had our own contingency plans. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Morrison and others had prepared for this possibility, ensuring the truth would come out even if they didn't survive to tell it. Look at the responses. Linda pointed to the tablet. Thousands of medical professionals were coming forward with their own stories. Nurses who had witnessed suspicious deaths. Administrators pressured to falsify records. A systemic cancer exposed to light. Rachel's phone buzzed continuously as the story snowballed. FBI offices nationwide are being flooded with tips. Healthcare workers, hospital staff, family members of victims, everyone's talking now. Because they finally feel safe to speak, Sarah realized. The people who tried to silence us just proved how much they feared the truth. Outside the briefing room, they could hear increased activity as more witnesses arrived seeking protection. The military base was becoming a gathering point for those brave enough to stand against corruption. "What happens now?" Linda asked. Rachel straightened her jacket, determination in her eyes. "Now we build the biggest RICO case in history. Medical fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, organ trafficking, obstruction of justice. We take down the entire network." "And the patients?" Sarah pressed. "The families who lost loved ones? They get justice," Morrison assured her. "Every case reopened, every death investigated. No more covering up murders as medical complications." Sarah walked to the window, watching military helicopters bring in more witnesses. She thought of that first moment when she discovered Michael Cooper's falsified death certificate. How close she had come to dismissing her suspicions, to remaining silent like so many others. "We're going to need protection for a long time," she said quietly. "They'll never stop trying to bury this." "Let them try," Rachel replied. "The truth is out now. All we have to do is make sure justice is served." The tablet continued to stream breaking news. Hospital boards resigning en masse. Medical licensing boards launching emergency reviews. Congressional hearings being scheduled. A revolution was beginning in American healthcare, sparked by one nurse who refused to look away from suspicious deaths. For Sarah, it felt both terrifying and inevitable, like watching a tsunami approach after throwing the first stone. "Ready for what comes next?" Rachel asked. Sarah looked at Linda, at Morrison, and all the other whistleblowers gathering to testify. None of them had chosen this fight, but they would see it through together. "Ready," she answered. The time for fear was over. Now was the time for truth. The congressional hearings began 3 months after the database leak. Sarah sat in the witness chair, facing a panel of stern-faced legislators and a gallery packed with journalists, medical professionals, and families of victims. The weight of their collective grief and anger was palpable. "Ms. Chung," the committee chairman began, "please describe for the record how you first became aware of the organ trafficking operation at St. Mary's Memorial." Sarah leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady. "It started with irregularities in patient records. Healthy patients suddenly developing fatal complications. Organ donation paperwork prepared before deaths occurred. A pattern emerged that couldn't be explained by medical chance." The chairman nodded. "And when you brought these concerns to hospital administration?" "I was told to focus on my duties, that these matters were handled at a higher level." Sarah's gaze swept the gallery, finding familiar faces. "Now we know why. The entire system was designed to silence questions." Video screens displayed evidence as she testified. Surgical records, death certificates, financial transactions. The scope of the conspiracy unfolded in clinical detail, each document adding to the horror. According to these records, a congresswoman interjected. Over 200 patients were targeted across multiple hospitals. How was this possible? How did no one notice? "People did notice," Sarah corrected. "Nurses, doctors, administrators, many saw suspicious patterns, but the system was built to discourage questions. Those who pushed too hard found their careers destroyed, their concerns dismissed as paranoia. Until you came forward," the chairman observed. "Until we all came forward," Sarah amended, gesturing to the other whistleblowers waiting to testify. "I simply exposed one thread that helped unravel the whole tapestry." The questioning continued for hours. Sarah described the attack on the safe house, the desperate attempts to silence witnesses, the final revelation of the database. Her testimony was followed by Dr. Morrison, then others, each adding layers to the devastating picture of systematic murder for profit. During a brief recess, Rachel pulled Sarah aside. "Sullivan's being brought in to testify next week. His full confession names 37 judges, 12 hospital board members, and over 50 surgeons involved in the scheme. Any signs of retaliation? Sarah asked. They're still trying. 2 more witnesses received death threats this morning. But with the military providing security and the public spotlight on the case, their options are limited. The afternoon session focused on the victims. Family members testified about loved ones who had entered hospitals for routine procedures, only to die unexpectedly. Their stories were heartbreaking in their similarity. The sudden complications, the pressure to approve organ donation, the convenient recipients already waiting. Andrea Kemp's mother approached Sarah during another break. "Thank you," she said simply, gripping Sarah's hands. "We thought we were alone in our grief and our suspicions. Now we know the truth." The truth was spreading beyond the hearings. Medical schools were revising their ethics curricula. Hospitals nationwide were implementing new oversight procedures. Professional associations were conducting emergency reviews of organ donation protocols. "It's changing everything," Linda observed, watching protesters outside demand healthcare reform. The whole system is being rebuilt from the ground up, but the cost was still mounting. That evening, Sarah received news that another witness, a transplant coordinator from Chicago, had been found dead in an apparent suicide. The pattern of silencing continued, even as the truth emerged. "They're desperate now," Rachel said when Sarah told her. "Every death, every threat just proves how deep this goes. But we're past the point where they can stop it." Sarah wasn't so sure. "As long as there's demand for organs, someone will try to create supply. We've exposed one network, but others will form. Then we make sure the new safeguards work." Morrison joined them, holding up a draft of proposed legislation: mandatory oversight committees, independent auditors, real protection for whistleblowers. The next day's hearing focused on the international connections. Shell companies in Panama, private clinics in Eastern Europe, a global network that turned human organs into commodities and medical ethics into suggestions. Sarah's final testimony addressed the future. "We can't undo the murders that were committed," she told the committee. "We can't bring back those who died for profit, but we can honor their memories by ensuring this never happens again." The chairman asked one last question. "Given the threats to your life, the loss of your career, would you make the same choice to come forward?" Sarah thought of Michael Cooper, alive with his family, of Andrea Kemp's mother finally knowing the truth, of all the future patients who would be protected by new safeguards. "Every time," she answered, "some truths have to be told, no matter the cost." Outside the hearing room, more whistleblowers waited to testify. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. A system built on silence was being dismantled by voices that refused to be quieted. 1 year later, Sarah stood at the podium of St. Mary's Memorial's newly dedicated Ethics and Transparency Center. The hospital, under completely new leadership, had transformed itself from a symbol of corruption into a model of reform. Behind her sat Michael Cooper and his family, along with dozens of other survivors and family members of victims. "We gathered today not just to open a building," she began, "but to mark a fundamental change in how we approach medical care. This center will serve as both a memorial to those we lost and a guardian against future abuses." The audience included many familiar faces. Linda, now the hospital's chief compliance officer. Dr. Morrison, heading the new oversight committee. Rachel, recently promoted after the successful prosecution of the organ trafficking network. "In the past year, we've seen 237 convictions," Sarah continued. "Corrupt doctors, administrators, and officials who treated human lives as commodities. But more importantly, we've seen real change in how our healthcare system operates." She gestured to the wall behind her, where photos of victims hung alongside new safeguards implemented in their names. The Andrea Kemp Protocol for Organ Donation Oversight. The Whitman Rule requiring multiple independent reviews of unexpected deaths. the Rodriguez standards for whistleblower protection. These changes came at a terrible cost, Sarah acknowledged. Lives were lost, families were shattered, trust was broken. But from that darkness, we've built something new. A system where ethics and transparency aren't just words on a wall, but daily practices enforced at every level. The rehabilitation of St. Mary's hadn't been easy. Many had argued for shutting it down completely, but Sarah and others had pushed for transformation instead of destruction. The hospital's journey from corruption to redemption could serve as a model for others. After the ceremony, Michael Cooper approached her. "My daughter's starting nursing school next fall," he said proudly. "She says you inspired her, showed her that one person really can change things." Sarah smiled, remembering the frightened patient they'd saved from harvest. "How are you doing with everything?" "Some nightmares still," he admitted. "But helping other survivors through the support group helps. We're healing together." Rachel joined them, tablet in hand. Final numbers from the task force. Over $5 billion in illegal organ sales traced. 312 murders confirmed. 94 hospitals implementing new oversight systems. And the international networks? Sarah asked. Interpol's leading that investigation now. They've shut down clinics in 6 countries. More being discovered every month. The scope of change was still hard to grasp. What had started with one suspicious death certificate had exposed corruption across continents. The ripples were still spreading. Linda appeared with Dr. Morrison. "They're ready for the training session," she announced. First group of ethics compliance officers from the hospital network. Sarah gathered her materials. Part of the center's mission was training healthcare workers to recognize and report suspicious patterns. No more looking away. No more silence. "Before you go," Morrison said, "there's something you should see." She led them to the center's research wing, where data analysts tracked organ donation statistics nationwide. Look at the numbers since the new protocols were implemented. The screen showed something remarkable. Despite fears that stricter oversight would reduce organ availability, legitimate donations had increased. People trusted the system more, knowing it was protected from abuse. Turns out, Morrison observed, when people have faith in medical ethics, they're more willing to become donors. Who would have thought? Sarah thought of all the families who had lost loved ones to the trafficking ring. We'll never know how many lives were taken, but we can count how many we're saving now. The day's final event was a candlelight vigil. Hundreds gathered in the hospital courtyard, holding lights against the gathering dusk. Sarah stood with survivors and whistleblowers, watching flames multiply until they pushed back the darkness. "What's next?" Rachel asked softly. Sarah looked at the Ethics Center, at the photos of victims who had become catalysts for change, at the new generation of healthcare workers learning to protect their patients. "We keep building," she answered. "We keep watching. We keep speaking truth even when it's dangerous." Especially when it's dangerous. The changes they'd fought for were now law. But laws were only as strong as the people enforcing them. Every new safeguard, every oversight committee, every whistleblower protection existed because someone had refused to be silent. As the vigil ended, Sarah read the words inscribed above the center's entrance, "In memory of those lost, in service to those who remain, in dedication to truth that cannot be buried." The story of St. Mary's would be told for years, not just as a cautionary tale of corruption, but as proof that change was possible, that systems could be reformed, that truth eventually would find its voice. Sarah Chun had started as one nurse who noticed something wrong. She'd become part of something much larger, a movement that transformed American healthcare. But she knew the work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. There would always be those who saw profit in others' pain. Always be systems that needed watchful eyes. Always be truths that needed telling. And there would always be people willing to stand up and tell them. If you enjoyed this story, We'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!